Good morning.
Morning.
Everyone. My name is Vivian Flowers, and I'm the state representative for District 17. I called this press conference today and invited Pastor Ryan Davis to join me to speak to you this morning regarding the events that followed the house party fundraiser for Pastor Davis a week ago today. I'll share with you my best recollection of what happened. Pastor Davis will provide an update of what actions we've taken since the incident, and we'll both offer perspectives on action steps we believe must be taken moving forward, and then we'll take questions. But first, I'd like to begin with a few contextual points that I want to acknowledge and not tiptoe around. Number one, our race was a factor in how we were treated, or rather mistreated, by the people who harassed and threatened us from their porches and their yard. And everyone in this room is aware of race as a factor in circumstances involving law enforcement, especially with African Americans. Number two, the Little Rock police officers we encountered during the incident, whom were black and white, of varying ages and experience, were all professional, helpful, and responses after Mr. Kopsky repeatedly screamed that we were his friends. We're the ones who call the police and are an elected official and a political candidate. Which brings me to number three. While it shouldn't matter whether one is a politician or not, black, white, Latino, Asian, or whatever race or ethnicity, wealthy, poor, man, woman, young, old, we all know that it does. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, I can't believe this happened to you, but it did. And on different levels, it has happened many times before. And the thing that we have to remember today is that it's happening right now. It happens every day to people who cannot call a press conference and have people stand behind them. Bigots who harass, attack, and weaponize 911 on people of color, studying, driving, barbecuing, picnicking, shopping, and I guess now talking and leaning against your car while black, must stop and must be held accountable. And so too must law enforcement's excessive use of force, along with disparate treatment of people of color. So here's what happened. Last Monday evening, as we left, a fundraiser for Pastor Ryan Davis held at the home of Bill Kopsky on Denison Street in the Stiff Station neighborhood of Little Rock, Arkansas. We stood outside with Bill and another friend talking. And then another friend had to go home. Bill went inside to tuck his kids in. Ryan and I were still talking, and he said, let me walk you to your car, because I was parked a block away and it was dark. We continued to talk, and we continued to talk, and as we continued to talk, a woman came out of the house where my car was parked and began screaming loudly that she didn't know who we were and that she was going to call the police. Well, it's 2020 and we laughed. And I put on my flip-flops and said, well, I guess I'll just wait for the police. We continued to talk, and the next thing we knew, two men came out with her and began to argue and cuss. And the whole time, Pastor Davis very calmly told them that it didn't matter who we were, that we were on a public street, that we could stay here, and that basically they needed to mind their business and go back in the house. The young men began to curse and then approach us from the porch to the grass. That is when we both told them that we were calling the police. Ryan was very, I think, deliberate and strategic in stepping into, because we didn't know what they had on them. He was very deliberate and strategic in walking in the middle of the street and speaking loudly, I think, to get the attention of people in their homes in case they had something or in case they began to attack us physically. When they saw that we were calling the police, they stepped back on the porch. That is when the woman across the street and about 2 houses down came outside and told us, basically began screaming the same kinds of questions. Who are you? Telling us we don't belong there, telling us we needed to go home. And Ryan responded in the same manner that he did with the family across the street. And at some point, that lady screamed, "Drop dead." And then we heard a gunshot. We immediately called the police again. And at that time, the dispatch took information, detailed information about where we were. I gave my name. I was so frazzled that I was speaking as if I was talking to the same person who I'd spoken with before. She stopped and said, "Hey, ma'am, you didn't talk to me before. What's your name?" I'm looking at Ryan. He's on the phone as well. And she asked for a description of what Ryan was wearing. I can't remember if I gave a description of what I was wearing. And she asked me the description of the lady. She asked me her race. I told her. I also told her the woman's address. She said the police will be right there. We hung up. We looked. And then we saw a couple of vehicles coming forward. And I wondered, why are they parking? I didn't know. I figured, well, maybe they weren't the police. And then I guess Ryan noticed that one of the vehicles was police, and he began waving his arms. And then the next thing I remember, there was a lot of noise and arguing. And I would realize later that that was Bill Kopsky, who had come out of his house, because I had texted him earlier when the first lady began harassing us. And then when the sons came out, I said, or I assumed they were her sons, "Hey, these sons are coming out." And that was the last thing that I had told Bill Kopsky. So then he comes out. He has no idea that there had been a shot. His wife had heard it, but he hadn't. He just comes out and sees police officers quietly walking down the street with their firearms discharged and pointing our way. And he sees us standing in the street. At this point, we didn't see that. And then when we did, and they got closer, they told us to put our hands in the air, put our hands in the air. Both of us complied. Then I was concerned because I had my phone in my hand. And I very gently put my phone down on my car and raised my hand again. Bill continued to walk toward, and then he started to say, "That's a sitting legislator, and that's a candidate for the legislature. Those are my friends." And at that point, then he began to threaten and say that he had called his city council person and the supervisor. The energy of those officers changed. They put their firearms down. They began to ask us what happened. And they also explained why they came forward the way that they did. And at that time, I understood, and I said I understood. My primary concern at that point was accountability for the people who had harassed us and basically violated our space, violated our peace, and violated our... And ultimately, there was a lot of back and forth questioning. I looked over, and there was one young man on the first porch who argued with the police at first. Then I saw them searching him and asking him questions. After that, I didn't see him, and no one from that house would answer the door or subject themselves to any further questioning from the police. The lady who we believe, who we're certain shot the gun, said that she didn't shoot the gun, and there was some questions about whether or not she was in the house when the gun fired, which she was not. We couldn't say that we saw her because it was dark. Ultimately, she did acknowledge that she told us to drop dead. So that she was cited for terroristic threatening. And before I turn the podium over to Pastor Davis, I want to say that we were calm and cool and collected because we had to be. This is not the first time that I've had a scary encounter with the police. And this is not the first time that I haven't had an encounter with someone who is racist and who is trying to violate my space. I don't think that it was until at least 24 hours that I read Bill Kopsky's account of what happened did I have an out-of-body experience like I was reading what happened to somebody else. And all of the what ifs and what could have happened to me hit me. We will talk about how we need to move forward after Pastor Davis provides you with an update of what we've done since then and what our concerns are at this point. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Representative Flowers for her invitation to this conference. And I'll be brief. I'll just discuss what steps we've taken since the incident last week. So on a personal level, that the biggest alarms came, of course, from my wife on that very night. I went immediately from that scene, headed to my campaign treasurer's house to count down the till, if you will. And I explained to him what happened, and his response was, "Why are you on your way to my house and not your house?" And you know, that kind of dissonance is real and connected in some ways to, again, the lived experiences, because this is not my first experience in this world dealing with people who would question your mere existence. Not my first experience in the city of Little Rock. Not my first experience in the near parts of that neighborhood. And there's no part of our city that is immune to that. I've heard, and I'm grateful to so many folks who have said, you know, we want you to feel welcome in our neighborhood. And as much as I appreciate that, I don't feel like I require an official welcome in a city that I was born and raised in. And beyond the welcome, which I, again, am grateful for, what I also desire is to just be left alone sometimes, you know, and guaranteed freedom of movement, guaranteed freedom of non-movement in this case. So there's that. So officially, Representative Flowers and I did the following day file a complaint with the prosecutor's office, and there is an active and ongoing investigation, which is in the public purview, and you, of course, have the privilege to look into that. But I also made a request to our mayor's office to review via the Little Rock Citizens Review Board this incident, and specifically the initial police response toward the ostensible victims in this incident, the victims at the scene. And I have to insist that we have to bring to bear some questions about a protocol, because we were told that this was the protocol that brings police officers to a scene with guns drawn on, again, ostensible victims. And I have to ask that question because it occurred to me the next day that I respect the volatility of guns. I respect the volatility of darkness. I respect the volatility of several people calling and exacerbating a situation that we felt we'd already taken care of. And so, you know, I refuse to over-dramatize this. I refuse also to politicize this, but I know for a fact that there is only an inch between the violence of a gun and somebody else's innocence. And I don't accept that we should continue to have a protocol that has several police officers, because there were several, with drawn guns on folks standing in the middle of the street. There was some sort of disconnect between dispatch and the police officers at the scene. I remember describing both myself and Representative Flowers to the dispatch twice. I remember walking very intently to the very middle of the street and doing this because I make it a practice of showing the palms of my hands to police officers. I received several questions from folks who feel like I should have taken a more radical position. But let me say this, I was there and you were not. And there were several police officers and several guns. and I don't own a gun. Did not have one at the scene. And so I made the very intentional choice of showing my palms because I have 3 children, because I have a wife, because I have a mother, because I want to keep living, because I don't otherwise want to be injured. So that was a choice we made. But I'll tell you this, I also have a bivocational interest in the beloved community.
Yes.
You know, I get for some folks that that's not the revolutionary position that we want to take, but a real American revolutionary, Fred Hampton, once said, we don't fight fire with fire, we fight fire with water. That's the sensible thing to do. But I also hear the psalmist calling from the 27th Psalm saying, I would have fainted, I would have fallen out if I didn't believe that I would see the goodness of God in the land of the living. And I still have an abiding faith in that. Now, along with that faith comes what I said earlier, a great desire to just be left alone. A great desire to be able to exist in this world without a questioning of my existence in any place, certainly in the city that I love and that I choose to raise my family in. And I suppose we can just leave it at that. And Representative Flowers and I will.
I just wanted to add one thing. In terms of moving forward, this is not the first time that I have sought to address these issues as a legislator. Whether I use my bully pulpit, however small, on Facebook, or by filing legislation, running interim studies. Just last year, we ran an interim study to explore ways in which we could maximize statewide partnerships so that small police departments could access body cams at a fair cost. And I can't tell you the pushback, but I know for a fact that there are people on both sides of the political aisle or philosophical spectrum who are doing this work and who are not afraid to make change. I just left the Advanced Justice Conference held by NCSL and other legislative organizations with my colleague, Representative Jamie Scott. And she can attest to the fact that there are Republicans in red states, Democrats in blue states. Organizations like ALEC that had previously promoted Stand Your Ground will no longer promote that law. And we talked to them about not only no longer promoting it, but promoting the repeal where it has been passed. And so when we think about policies that matter, there is no reason why we should not have body cams across the state, why we should not be collecting data. Our state police does an awesome job of it. And if this matters to us, if we care about this when someone doesn't become a hashtag, then we will take action. So I plan to join with my colleagues to work with the governor. I've already reached out to the speaker, and I'm certain that Senator Elliott, who had made a statement last week, will also reach out to Senate leadership. There is no reason that we should remain vulnerable and continue to watch these things happen or never see these things happen, but know that they happen and not do anything about it. In addition to body cams and data collection, there should be legislation focused on punishing false police reports. Doing anything while black, brown, white, or anything should not be something that someone has the power to exacerbate and weaponize against someone using the police and using emergency services. There should be a penalty for that. And the final example I will leave you with is the very scope of the justification for deadly force is something that we have to look at. We want our police officers to be safe, but in order for them to be safe, there have to be very clear rules of engagement, and there has to be a clear and consistent application of that law for everyone. So whether you are a victim or a suspect, you are treated with dignity, your life is preserved when at all possible. Delaware and Tennessee have a narrower scope than most other states. We can follow that example. And then with that, we'd be happy to take questions. Okay, look like we covered it all, yes.
So just to clarify, you're proposing pushing for 3 new areas of legislation, appropriation for body cameras, increasing the punishment for filing police report, and creating a narrower scope for the use of lethal force by police departments?
It's not, well, let me clarify. So I'm not saying just an appropriation, but I think that we can look at the efficiency of our police departments working together, whether utilizing a partnership with the municipal league to maximize the cost efficiency of data storage, which is typically the cost, because they can lease the equipment, but the data storage is where the cost comes in. Also, our state police does an awesome job of collecting data when it comes to stops, which protects the officer, but also protects citizens. And I think I want to make sure that we talk about punishing false police reports. And then finally, looking at the way that we justify the use of lethal force. So those are 4 things.
Thank you. I just want to say that I really hate that all of this ever happened to individuals. I know you guys personally, and so I just want to send love. So my question is, what are we doing about the process of training police officers in de-escalation, conflict resolution? Because right now, that's not something that they even have to, it's not even required. So what are we doing in this state to make sure that that happens?
Actually, it is required, and there are training protocols. I don't know how effective and how often.
Right.
It is something that I believe we need to look at. And just with those 4 items that I mentioned, and we're not limited to looking at that because there are other things that we know work.
Right.
Whatever is done, we would have to go back and train officers. Because the point that I would make about what happened the other day, those officers were following the protocol and the rules of engagement that they've been trained to follow. So it's not about an individual officer looking through a certain prism. This is what they're trained to do. So we have to look at that and retrain. Yes, sir.
Scott Green, Central Arkansas Press. In that moment, do you recall how many cars you saw or how many policemen actually showed up on the scene? First question. And second, have you received an apology from the police chief for the city of Bluff?
And I don't know if you recall, Ryan, but
I'll hesitate to say a number. I can't remember an exact number, but there were at least 10 officers at the scene.
I have spoken with the chief, and he was, he may have apologized, but more than anything, he was very responsive and wants to make sure that whatever needs to be done to make this right, that it be done. And I want to stop, and I know there are a couple of other folks that have questions, just in case we end abruptly, because I know this is going on just a little long. There are so many people here today, family, friends, my pastor, my bishop, my father, and so while, as Senator Elliott noted in her statement, we aren't special to this process because we know it happens to other people. We're special to our loved ones, and we're special to people. And so I just want to thank everyone who showed up today, our loved ones, people who we don't know, and organization representatives, because this is important. Yes, sir.
You mentioned
some people would have had you do something differently in the middle of that street? What would people have had you do more radical?
Well, I mean, these are folks who, these are folks I love, and, I get their disconnection from what actually happened, and, so folks always, there are people who have said, there is a person rather who has said, I would have done this instead of putting my hands up, and I mean, I have to dismiss that outright because again, only Representative Flowers and I were there, so and I understand, the general frustration and the general want for folks to have done something that people might have considered more revolutionary. There's a great book by Huey Newton called Revolutionary Suicide. It's a good book, but not a good idea.
On the policy proposals that you mentioned, Mr. Davis, if elected to the state house with those, the areas you would also push forward in support of legislation?
Absolutely, and not necessarily because of this particular personal experience, because as I noted, this is not my first rodeo, if you will, and I get that there's none of these are finite to the issues connected to race in this issue, which is primary to me, but I think that for the general protection of citizens, these are important steps to take.
Yes, sir.
The chief attended the NAACP meeting on last week, and at that meeting, he did indicate that the police officers did follow proper protocol. So when you spoke with him, did you mention anything to him about the drawing of the weapons at all?
No, sir. When I talked with him, it was an initial conversation, and he was making contact. He was letting me know that although we had filed the complaint with the prosecutor's office, that they were investigating, and he was making himself available. So we didn't have a lengthy conversation, and really it's been since then, since last week, that I've had conversations with others in law enforcement. Not my chief, who is here today. I plan to have a conversation with him to get his thoughts. But I've had conversations with other law enforcement because I think both of us, we talked about that, and they said, that that's protocol, and it might be that is their protocol and the protocol needs to be changed. Or it might be that that's what their interpretation is. I don't know yet, and I think that because Pastor Davis submitted a request to the city through the mayor's office for this to be reviewed, I think that information will come.
Do you anticipate a follow-up conversation with him?
Yes, I do.
Regarding the complaint with the prosecutor's office, did it seem they took your complaint seriously?
Yes.
And what would you like to see them do?
We both would like to see an arrest. The person who we filed the complaints against admitted to officers that there was a terroristic threatening. There comes a penalty with that, and what we were told is that there would be an affidavit and an arrest, and that she would have to come before the court. Now, what that outcome would be, I don't know, but the important thing, and I think that that's another thing that's important as community. People, when these things happen, people need to be made aware that there are processes in place to lodge complaints. I would remind you that when there are fatalities, it's very important in the case of police that if that person has a past record, it makes it a lot easier to hold that officer accountable. Or if there is a scenario with a private citizen who has a record, even if it's something that people perceive to be petty and nothing will come from it, it's important that we file complaints and we make public when we've been violated.
I was going to ask, what are your plans for the rest of the day here on the eve of the election, the special election?
I will say this, I've been very intentional about, I've not made a statement connected to my campaign about this. This is not for me a matter to be politicized. I'll just say that. I think Ferranda had a question.
So when I heard this happening, I was with it because you guys are like the best and the brightest, a representative and a hopeful. What advice would you have
complaint, document, use your phone, call your state legislator, call your city council person.
I think we have many historical examples of the fact that we believe in and engage the process until we've been given reason to not believe in the process. So the process of filing a complaint at the prosecutor's office in this open investigation is something that I'll trust until we have reason to not trust it.
Representative Bluff.
Yes.
Under Arkansas state law, filing a false police report is a misdemeanor and it can rise to a felony depending on the situation and the outcome of the filing. How do you plan to change that? Or increase the punishment, or?
I don't know. I don't know what the punishment is, but I think a lot of times too, we have measures in place that are not implemented. So I think that what we can do where that's concerned is draw attention that that exists and make sure that you know, people who are affected by someone who would do that, again, files the complaint and contacts law enforcement and holds that person accountable.
Representative Flowers, what was the falsehood of the complaint? You know, did they say y'all were?
So they didn't make a complaint against us. Well, actually, they did.
They
Yes,
did. They
did.
In their call to 911, they said that we were standing in the street arguing.
Yeah. Yes,
The reason I'm
Aaron.
here in postal conference broadcast on radio, Vice President Overall, this question is in regards to legislation. I heard you make comments in regards to these following protocol or policy. And so here's my concern and question. As a former police officer, typically when there is a situation such as this, usually when the police approach the suspect and they don't allow them entry into their home and to look at their weapons or whatever they're trying to see, they usually ask those people to step outside and detain them because they are black, and then they go get a warrant to come back and search the house. My question in reference to legislation is, would you consider legislation in regards to taking away the discretion of police officers in their determining when to arrest, who to arrest, and what to charge someone with? Because clearly there is an over-representation of black people and brown people and poor folks as it relates to who the cops arrest for similar situations.
I'm open to filing and pushing forward anything that will ensure objectivity and equity. So yes.
Arkansas is like one of about 4 states in the United States of America that doesn't have hate crime laws. A lot of times,
Thank you for bringing that up.
people bring up
Yes.
the fact that like hate crimes are happening, but a lot of times people don't realize the domestic terrorism that goes on within our country, especially on people of color. Is that something y'all push for in legislation? Ronnie Davis, if you're elected, and this Representative Flowers, should Arkansas have some hate crime laws here?
Absolutely.
Yes. I actually had that down and I promise I'll show you. And we know that, and this goes to, that actually goes back to the fact that this is not a red, or doesn't have to be a red, blue, Republican, Democratic issue, because we know that the governor has voiced some intent at looking at or pushing forward hate crimes law in Arkansas. And so that's something that I would definitely support. And I want to reiterate that right here, that the stand your ground law is harmful and cannot be something that we accept in this state. Okay, thank you all very much.